Story 1. It was the middle of the night when my phone buzzed. A motion alert from my security system. I almost ignored it. The system sent alerts all the time. Cars driving by, stray cats, tree branches swaying. But something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the way the notification lingered on my screen, almost demanding my attention. I swiped it open, half expecting to see nothing, just another false alarm. But as the footage played back, I felt my stomach turn to ice. The driveway was empty until the final second. A shadow, faint but undeniable, standing at the far edge of the screen. It was tall, unmoving, as if it had been there the whole time, just waiting for me to notice. My pulse quickened as I replayed the footage, eyes straining. The timestamp read 2:37 a.m. I scrolled back. There was no sign of anyone approaching. One frame, the driveway was empty. The next, it was there. But the worst part, it never left. I fast-forwarded through the next hour of footage, expecting to see it turn, step back into the shadows, disappear. It never did. But when I switched to the live feed, my driveway was empty. Nothing there. Nothing at all. A glitch, I told myself. My skin crawling. A camera error. That was all. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong. I forced myself to breathe, shaking my head at my own paranoia. I had spent years working in tech security, analyzing footage, fixing corrupted feeds. If this was a glitch, I would find an explanation. But as I sat there, staring at that empty driveway, an unease I could not explain settled into my bones. My house was in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where nothing ever happened. There was no reason for someone to be lurking outside, no reason for anyone to be on my property at that hour. I checked the other camera feeds, front door, backyard, side gate. Nothing. Just that one figure. I zoomed in, trying to make sense of its shape, but the pixels blurred together, refusing to form a clear image. It had no face, no distinguishable features, just a dark outline. My mouth felt dry as I switched to real-time view again, half expecting the figure to still be there. But the driveway was empty. Maybe I had been staring at the screen too long. Maybe my mind was making something out of nothing. But then, another motion alert. My heart jumped as I opened it, expecting the same figure. But it was just a car, a regular car passing by. I exhaled, feeling ridiculous. I needed sleep. I shut off the app, locked my phone, and tried to forget about it. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, that image stayed burned into my mind. A figure standing in my driveway, still, silent, watching. I told myself I would check the footage again in the morning. Maybe I would see something I had missed. Maybe I would find an answer, but I already knew the truth. I was not going to sleep that night. I tried to shake off the lingering unease, but something gnawed at the back of my mind. How long had it been standing there before my camera picked it up? Had it been there all night, just outside the view of the lens, shifting closer, inch by inch? My thoughts spiraled, and I reached for my phone again, unlocking the security app with a trembling hand. The playback loaded slowly, pixelated in the darkness. The figure was still in the final frame, as expected, standing like a statue at the far end of my driveway. But something was off. The first time I had watched, it had been nothing but a blurry shadow. Now, the shape had shifted slightly. Its posture was different, like it had moved, but only in the recording. I scrubbed backward frame by frame, trying to find when it had changed. Every second I rewound, my stomach clenched tighter. There, the shift was so small, so unnatural, like it had not walked or turned, but had been altered between two frames, its body adjusting by some unseen force. The edges of my vision blurred as I stared, heart hammering against my ribs. It was closer now, just slightly. A foot forward, maybe less. But I had watched this footage before. I knew exactly where it had been. It had moved. And worse, the system had never detected it. The next night, I told myself I would not check the cameras again. I would silence the notifications, let the system do its job, and ignore any alerts that came through. But when my phone buzzed at exactly 2:37 a.m., the temptation was unbearable. My hands moved before I could stop them, swiping open the app, watching as the footage loaded. My stomach dropped. The figure was there again, but this time it was closer. No longer at the far end of the driveway, but several feet forward, closer to the house, closer to me. My heart pounded as I rewound the footage, looking for any sign of movement, but just like before, there was nothing. One frame, empty driveway. The next, it was there. I zoomed in, trying to see if its posture had changed. Was it facing the house? Was it watching me? The grainy footage refused to clarify. The pixels breaking apart the closer I looked. I could feel my own pulse echoing in my ears, an unbearable silence pressing in from all sides. I should not be watching this. I needed to sleep, needed to forget about it. But my hand trembled over the screen, unwilling to turn it off. Then, as I watched, the security feed glitched, just for a second. A single frame flickered in and out, something different. I scrolled back, pausing it, feeling the blood drain from my face. The figure's head had tilted, only slightly, but it had. It had moved. My breath caught in my throat. This was not a trick of the light. This was not a glitch. The figure had acknowledged me. I locked my phone and threw it onto my nightstand, my chest heaving. This was absurd. I was losing my mind. I needed sleep, but I could not stop thinking about it. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that shadow inching closer. Did it know I was watching? Was it waiting for something? I forced myself to breathe, pressing my hands against my temples, willing myself to think rationally. I had dealt with security footage for years. I had seen every malfunction, every data glitch, every possible trick of the system. This was not possible. And yet, it had happened. My exhaustion finally won, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, I checked the footage again. A part of me hoped the night's events had been a bad dream, that I would open the app and find nothing but an empty driveway. But the footage was still there. The figure was still there. My stomach turned as I scrolled through the next few hours. Unlike the first night, when it had stayed frozen in place, this time, something worse had happened. Frame by frame, I saw it. The slightest movements, the smallest shifts. It was moving. At 4:06 a.m., it had taken another step. Then, at 5:12 a.m., another. Barely noticeable, but there, I checked the timestamps. The system had not registered any motion alerts after the first one. It should have. The cameras should have picked up the movements, but the system had acted like it never happened, as if it did not want me to know. My hands felt numb as I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. Was this thing getting closer each night? My thoughts spiraled, playing through every possible explanation. A malfunction, someone messing with me, a stalker. The idea chilled me to my core. If someone had been standing outside my house for 2 nights in a row, I needed to call the police. But how could I explain this? How could I prove something was there when I had no evidence of it arriving, no proof of it leaving, just still frames, just glitches? I felt sick. I closed the app and rubbed my face, exhaustion pressing against the backs of my eyes. Tonight, I would set up another camera, one inside the house, one facing my bedroom window. If this thing was real, if it was moving closer, then I would catch it. I had to. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, trying to focus on work, pretending everything was normal. But every time I glanced at my phone, I felt the urge to check again. As the sun set, an uneasy weight settled in my chest. Would it come back? That night, as I lay in bed, the silence felt heavier than usual, the air thick, stifling. At 2:37 a.m., my phone buzzed. I did not want to look. I did not want to see, but my hands moved on their own, unlocking the screen. The figure was there, standing at the base of my porch steps, closer than ever. By the third night, I was no longer convincing myself this was a glitch. It was real. The figure was real. And it was getting closer. My mind raced with every possibility. Was it a stalker? Someone targeting me? But how? No one had entered my property. No motion was ever recorded apart from its sudden appearance, and no footprints were found in the morning. I needed someone else to see it, someone who would not dismiss it as paranoia. That night, I invited Daniel, an old friend from college, who now worked as a police officer. He had always been skeptical of anything remotely supernatural, which is exactly why I needed his opinion. If there was a logical explanation, he would find it. I showed him the footage from the last 2 nights, watching as his face slowly shifted from mild curiosity to silent unease. His jaw tightened as he zoomed in on the shadowy figure, rewinding the footage repeatedly. "It is not walking into the frame," he muttered. "It is just there." I nodded. "And it never leaves." We sat in silence for a long moment before he leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "Could be a camera malfunction, maybe interference." I shook my head. "I checked everything. The system is fine. And last night, it moved. Slightly, but it moved." Daniel tapped his fingers against the table, clearly unsettled, but trying not to show it. "Okay, let's check the live feed." I hesitated, my stomach tightening. It was one thing to review footage, another to watch it in real time. I unlocked the app, my breath catching as the screen loaded. The figure was still there, closer than before, standing at the bottom of my porch steps. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Daniel swore under his breath. "Is that live?" I nodded slowly. "I am going out there," he said, standing up. My stomach dropped. "Wait." But he was already grabbing his flashlight, heading for the door. I followed him, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The porch light flickered as we stepped outside. The night air was still, thick with an unnatural silence. Daniel swept his flashlight across the yard. Nothing. No figure. No movement. Just empty space where it should have been. He turned back toward me. "You saw it just now. It should be right here." My hands were clammy as I pulled up the live feed again. The figure was still there, standing inches behind him. My voice caught in my throat. "Daniel, get inside. Now." He frowned. "What?" I could not speak. My body was frozen, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. "Get inside," I forced out. The second he turned around, The security feed glitched. A full second of static before it returned. The figure was gone. So was Daniel. I staggered backward, my vision tunneling. Daniel? My voice cracked as I scanned the yard. Nothing. No footprints. No sound. It was as if he had never been there. I ran to the porch, gripping the railing as nausea threatened to overwhelm me. My phone buzzed, a new motion alert. 2:37 a.m., hands shaking, I opened it. The footage played back. Daniel stepping outside, the figure waiting behind him. Then, a single frame of his face twisting in horror, a blur of movement. Then, nothing. The yard empty once again. I replayed it over and over, searching for any sign of where he had gone. But there was no struggle, no sound, just absence. I stumbled inside, locking the door behind me. My hands would not stop shaking. I checked my call log, my messages. I called him. It rang. Once, twice. Then, this number is no longer in service. My pulse pounded against my skull. That was not possible. I had just spoken to him hours ago. I checked his contact info. No records found. His name was gone from my phone. My mind spiraled, desperate for a logical explanation. I checked my old text messages, my email. Nothing. It was like Daniel had never existed. I ran to my computer, desperate to search for any trace of him online. Social media, old posts, police records. Every result came back blank. The world had erased him. My phone buzzed again. Another motion alert. I did not want to look. I did not want to see. But I had to. I tapped the notification, my body cold with terror. The feed loaded. The porch was empty. The yard was empty. Except for one thing. The figure was gone. And in its place, Daniel was standing there, watching, his face completely blank. I could not breathe. My best friend, the man I had known for years, was standing in my yard, staring directly at the camera. But something was wrong. His posture was too stiff, his expression too vacant, like a mannequin dressed in his clothes. I whispered his name under my breath, as if saying it out loud would somehow make sense of what I was seeing. My mind screamed at me to run outside, to grab him, to shake him awake. But my body refused to move. Something in me knew that whatever was standing there was not Daniel. My shaking hands hovered over my phone screen as I switched to the live feed, hoping, praying that this was a mistake. But it was not. He was still there, standing in the exact same place, unmoving, unblinking. My throat was dry. Was he waiting for something? I had to do something. Slowly I forced myself to stand, my legs weak beneath me. I grabbed the baseball bat from the corner of the room and made my way to the front door. Every step felt heavier, like the air itself was pushing against me. My fingers wrapped around the doorknob, but before I could turn it, another motion alert. I froze, my breath caught in my throat as I looked down at my phone. 2:37 a.m. The timestamp had not changed. My heart pounded. That was not possible. I had been watching for minutes, maybe longer. I should have seen time move forward, but it had not. The clock was frozen. I unlocked my phone, my hands trembling, and played back the footage. Daniel was still there, exactly as he had been before. Not a single muscle had moved. The camera was recording, but time itself had stopped. My head throbbed, my mind struggling to make sense of it. Then, suddenly, a flicker. I barely had time to react before the screen glitched. A brief, static burst, and when it cleared, Daniel was gone. I stumbled backward, my breath ragged. My hands felt numb as I scrolled back through the footage, desperate to see what had happened. But just like before, there was nothing. One frame, he was there. The next, gone. My knees buckled, and I sank onto the floor. My stomach twisted into knots. It took him. I did not know how, or why, or what it even was. But I knew one thing for certain. Daniel had not left on his own. He had been erased. Just like that thing had appeared out of nowhere. It had taken him in the same unnatural way. My body trembled as I checked my call log again. His number was still gone. I went to my messages, no texts, my emails, nothing. Every trace of Daniel was disappearing. I opened my browser, typing his name into a search bar. My fingers shook as I pressed enter. No results, no records. It was like he had never existed. My stomach churned. I rushed to my bedroom, throwing open my closet, digging through old boxes. I needed proof he had been real, a photo, a note, anything. But as I flipped through old pictures, my vision blurred with fear. Every photo that should have had him in it was different. I remembered standing next to him in that graduation picture. I knew we had taken that road trip to the Grand Canyon, but in every image, I was alone. A hollow ache spread through my chest. It was changing my past. It was not just taking him now, it was taking him from my entire life. My mind swirled in panic. My breaths came too fast, too shallow. Was I next? Was this thing slowly pulling me toward the same fate? My phone buzzed again, another motion alert. I nearly dropped it as I lifted the screen, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The front yard. The footage played. At first, I saw nothing, but then a single shadow moved across the edge of the screen. I paused the frame. My skin went cold. It was Daniel, or at least something that looked like him, but his body was distorted, his limbs slightly stretched, his movements unnatural. He was walking back toward the house. My stomach twisted violently. I stumbled away from the door, my hands clammy. The air inside my home felt thick, suffocating. Daniel had vanished, but now he was coming back. I barely had time to process what I was seeing. Daniel, if that thing was still Daniel, was approaching my house. My breath came in short gasps as I backed away from the front door. My phone gripped tightly in my shaking hands. The footage continued playing, the figure moving slowly, its limbs unnaturally stiff. Every few steps, the screen flickered. Each time, his posture changed slightly, as if something was struggling to make him move like a human. I swallowed down the rising panic, forcing myself to think. This was not possible. Daniel had disappeared. He had been taken. And now, somehow, he was coming back. My instinct screamed at me to run, to lock every door, and turn off every light. But something deeper, something ancient inside me, whispered a different warning. Do not acknowledge him. My fingers hovered over my phone screen, shaking as I tried to decide what to do. Should I call the police? Should I scream? The doorbell rang. The sound nearly sent me into cardiac arrest. A loud, sharp ding-dong, normal in every way, except for the fact that Daniel never rang the doorbell. He would knock, call out my name, text me. He would never just stand there waiting. My phone buzzed in my palm. Another motion alert. I hesitated before opening the app. The camera feed loaded. My stomach dropped. The porch was empty. No one there. No Daniel. Just silence. I locked my phone and backed away, my body trembling. I had to get out of the house. Now. I grabbed my car keys and ran out the back door, sprinting toward my driveway. My lungs burned, my heart hammering against my ribs. I fumbled with the car door handle, barely managing to yank it open before diving inside and locking it. My hands shook as I started the engine, my headlights cutting through the darkness. The moment I turned onto the road, I realized where I was going. Mr. Holloway, my neighbor, the man who never left his house, who had lived here longer than anyone else. If anyone knew what was happening, it was him. I pulled into his driveway and practically stumbled out of my car, banging on his front door. Mr. Holloway, please, I need to talk to you. Silence. My pulse pounded in my ears. The house was dark, the windows shut tight. I pounded on the door again, harder. Please, it is about... The lock clicked. I nearly fell backward as the door creaked open, just enough for me to see a sliver of his wrinkled face. His eyes were sharp, sunken, filled with something I could not describe. You saw it, did not you? His voice was barely a whisper. My throat was dry. I nodded. He exhaled slowly. You should not have looked. My stomach twisted. What is it? His gaze flickered past me, as if checking for something, before he muttered, Not here. Come in. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but if there were answers to be found, I needed them. I stepped inside, my skin crawling, as he locked the door behind me. The living room was cluttered, newspaper clippings scattered across the table. The air smelled of dust and something sour, like old wood left to rot. He gestured for me to sit. It happened before, he murmured, settling into a chair across from me. Not just to you. He tapped a shaky finger on a stack of papers. People. Missing. Always at night. Always without a trace. My pulse quickened as I scanned the clippings. Names. Dates. Photos of people who had disappeared in my neighborhood. Some from decades ago. Some from last year. They only show up on cameras, he continued. Never in person. If you see them, if you notice them, they know. And once you see them, they do not stop. My mouth went dry. What happens if they get close? His lips pressed into a thin line. No one knows, because no one remembers. A chill ran down my spine. I remember. He gave me a long, tired look. Do you? I opened my mouth, but the words died in my throat. His meaning sank into me like ice. If these things could erase people, could they erase memories too? My hands curled into fists. How do I stop it? He shook his head. You don't. My stomach twisted. Then what do I do? His voice was barely a breath. Leave before it is too late. A loud crash outside made me jump. The front porch. Mr. Holloway's expression darkened. They are here, he whispered. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I knew what it was before I even looked. Motion alert. I swallowed hard and lifted the screen. The live feed showed my car parked outside, but there was something else, someone else, standing right next to it. My blood turned to ice. It was me, an exact replica, standing by my car, staring up at the camera. The screen flickered, distorting my own face. The longer I stared, the less human it looked. I gasped and dropped the phone. My head snapped up to meet Holloway's gaze. His expression was grim. You have already lost. I could not move. I could not breathe. The screen in my hands was showing something that should not exist. Me, standing outside my car, staring directly into the camera. My mind rejected what I was seeing, screaming at me that it was a glitch, a trick, something explainable. But deep down, I knew this was real. The copy of me outside did not blink, did not shift, did not move like a human. Its limbs seemed slightly wrong, its shape distorted every few seconds, as if it was struggling to hold itself together. My throat closed. Mr. Holloway watched me from across the room, his face ashen. You need to leave, he whispered. But I could not move. My fingers tightened around my phone, my pulse hammering in my ears. How is this happening? My voice was barely a breath. Holloway exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. They get inside you. Once you see them, they do not just watch. They copy. They replace. A shiver ran down my spine. Replace? He nodded grimly. That is not you out there. But soon, it will be the only you left. A deep, suffocating terror rooted itself in my chest. What happens if it gets inside? Holloway's gaze darkened. You will not be here to find out. My stomach twisted violently. The image on my phone screen flickered. The copy of me had stepped closer to my car. Another flicker. Closer. I swore under my breath, my hands shaking. I need to go. I need to. Another motion alert. 2:37 a.m. My heart stopped. The feed refreshed. My copy was no longer outside. It was inside the house. A breath caught in my throat. I did not dare look around the room. My body stiffened, every nerve screaming for me to run. It is here, I whispered. Holloway's face drained of color. His lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but before he could, the lights cut out. Darkness swallowed the room, thick and absolute. My phone screen was the only glow left, casting a faint light over Holloway's terrified expression. Do not move, he breathed. The sound of my own pulse pounded in my ears. The house was too quiet. No hum of the refrigerator, no creaking floors, just pure, empty silence. And then a footstep, close, inside the room with us. My breath hitched. I could not see it, but I felt it. The presence, the shift in the air, the suffocating weight pressing down on me. Another footstep. Closer. Holloway gripped my wrist in the dark. Do not speak, he mouthed. The air in the room turned ice cold. My skin prickled with something ancient, something primal, something wrong. The thing wearing my face was standing only feet away. My fingers trembled over my phone. I turned the brightness down, angling it slightly, just enough to catch the screen's reflection on the window behind Holloway. My stomach clenched. There it was, my reflection, but it was not mirroring me. It stood slightly off, its mouth twitching as if attempting to form words. My hands curled into fists. It wants me, I mouthed. Holloway gave the smallest nod. Then do not let it. My jaw tightened. If I could not run, if I could not fight it, what else was there? Escape. I gritted my teeth, bracing myself. Then I bolted. I lunged for the front door, throwing it open so hard it nearly ripped off its hinges. Cold night air hit me like a shock, but I did not stop. I ran, past my car, past the street, past houses swallowed in darkness. I did not look back. I refused to look back. My only goal was to get as far away as possible. A deafening static noise rose behind me, growing louder, sharper, a screeching distortion that nearly sent me to my knees. But I did not stop running. My body was numb, my lungs burning, and then everything cut to silence. The static, the wind, even the sound of my own footsteps. The world itself seemed to pause. My instincts screamed at me to keep moving, but something inside me forced me to stop, to listen. The quiet stretched out endlessly, thick and unnatural. And then, from behind me, a whisper, my whisper. You cannot run forever. I ran. My legs burned. My chest ached. But I did not stop. I could not stop. The whisper had come from behind me, but I refused to turn around. My entire body screamed at me to keep moving, to put as much distance between myself and whatever had been in that house. The streets were eerily empty. No cars, no lights, no sound. It was as if the world itself had gone silent, waiting. My phone vibrated violently in my pocket. Another motion alert. My breath hitched, but I did not dare look. I knew what it would show. I could feel it, the weight of something unseen pressing against my back, close enough to touch. The static in my ears grew louder, a suffocating hum that seemed to coil around me. I forced my legs to move faster, sprinting down the empty road. I had no idea where I was going, only that I needed to get away. But then, a flicker. The streetlights around me blinked off, one by one. Darkness swallowed the road ahead of me, stretching out in an endless void. My heart pounded against my ribs, then another flicker. The lights behind me shut off too. The darkness was closing in. I dug my nails into my palms, forcing myself forward. It is not real, I whispered to myself. It is not real. It cannot be real. But I could hear footsteps, not mine. I reached an intersection, my lungs burning. My car. Where was my car? I had left it outside Holloway's house. Had I really run that far? My thoughts were spiraling, disjointed, as if my brain was fraying at the edges. A deep, sickening dread pooled in my stomach. I needed to call for help. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers slick with sweat. My hands trembled as I unlocked the screen. No service. My throat tightened. My notifications were still there. Motion alerts. More of them. Dozens. Every single one time-stamped at 2:37 a.m. My head pounded. That was not possible. I had been running for minutes, maybe longer. Time should have changed. I forced my shaking fingers to tap on the latest alert. The security footage loaded. The street in front of Holloway's house. Empty. Then, a flicker. A distortion. Me. Standing in the middle of the road, motionless, watching the camera. My breath hitched. Another flicker. Closer. A sharp ringing noise pierced through my ears. A high-pitched screech like metal scraping against metal. I dropped my phone. The sound did not stop. It grew louder, unbearable. It was inside my head. The world tilted. The shadows stretched, twisting unnaturally. The road beneath my feet felt wrong, too smooth, too flat. I blinked, my vision swimming. The houses on either side of me were fading, warping into nothing. My hands clawed at my own skin, trying to ground myself, but I could not feel anything. The world around me was unraveling, and I was unraveling with it. A cold breath ghosted against my neck. My body went rigid. It was behind me. I did not want to look. I could not look, but my body betrayed me. My head turned slowly, as if pulled by an invisible force. My vision blurred, static, eating at the edges of my sight. And then I saw it, myself, staring back at me. A perfect copy, no emotion, no soul, just empty, hollow eyes. Its mouth curled, stretching too wide, too wrong. It lifted a hand and waved. My stomach lurched. I had seen this before. I had watched the footage. I knew what happened next. The last frame. The moment everything went black. The copy took a step forward, and the world blinked out. Darkness, silence. I did not exist. At least, not in the way I once had. My thoughts felt stretched, disconnected, floating in an empty void. I tried to move, to breathe, but there was no body to command, no air to pull into my lungs. I was nowhere. I was nothing. Time no longer passed. There was only a suffocating absence. But then, a flicker, a single burst of static, sharp and disorienting, like an old television struggling to find a signal. I latched onto it, desperate for something, anything to hold on to. The flicker became an image, grainy, distorted, but recognizable. My house, my front porch, the camera feed. The world twisted violently, and suddenly I was there, watching, not in my body, not in the way I once had been, but through the cold, unfeeling eye of the security camera. I was the footage. I saw everything. The empty porch, the wind moving through the trees, the street lights flickering, but there was no one there. No me, no Daniel, no Holloway, as if we had never existed at all. A cold horror spread through me. I wanted to scream, to claw my way back, but there was no way out. I was trapped in a recording that had already ended. The footage played on, looping over and over, each time resetting to the same empty street. I had seen this feed before. I had watched it night after night, waiting for motion, waiting for proof that something was out there. But now, I was inside it. My mind frayed at the edges. This was not real. This could not be happening. I focused, tried to remember. I had been running. I had heard my own voice whisper behind me. I had turned, and then what? I reached for the memory, but the second I did, it slipped further away. My past was erasing itself. I was forgetting. A deep, suffocating panic set in. If I could not remember, was I even real? Was I even me? The flickering screen crackled, distorting. A shadow moved at the edge of the frame. My stomach dropped. I knew that shape. I had seen it before. I had watched it night after night, creeping closer, standing in my driveway, waiting. It had taken Daniel. It had taken me. But now it was walking toward the front door. The porch light flickered. The shadow stepped inside. The screen glitched. The recording ended. I gasped as I was ripped back into existence. I was not in my house. I was not in my street. I was somewhere else, somewhere wrong. My surroundings were hazy, as if they had not yet solidified. Shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting and unraveling before they could form anything recognizable. The air felt too thick, pressing in on me. I looked down. I was wearing different clothes. My phone was gone. My house keys gone. My skin prickled. A deep, sinking dread pooled in my stomach. The whisper came from behind me. "You are home." I turned slowly. A town, not mine, but familiar. The layout was the same, but the details were wrong. Street signs I did not recognize. Houses that looked just a little too perfect, as if they had never been lived in. People walked the sidewalks, smiling, greeting one another. My breath hitched. I knew some of them. Faces I recognized. Faces that had gone missing. My blood ran cold. I turned back, heart pounding. A storefront window reflected the town square. My gaze locked onto the glass. I saw them, the missing ones, walking, talking, living lives that were not their own, as if nothing had ever happened to them, as if they had never disappeared. My own reflection stared back at me, and it was smiling. My knees buckled. My mind screamed at me to wake up, to escape, but I already knew the truth. I was part of this place now. My past had been erased, my life rewritten, and soon I would forget I had ever been anyone else. My mouth opened on its own. "Morning," I heard myself say. A neighbor waved at me. I waved back. My movements felt practiced, automatic. The sun was shining. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass. I took a deep breath and smiled. And just like that, I was gone. The envelope was thin, plain, and unmarked. No return address, no postage stamp, nothing to suggest it had passed through any postal service. It was just there, waiting for me on my kitchen table when I woke up that morning. My name was printed neatly across the front in block letters, crisp and deliberate. I should have ignored it. I should have thrown it away. But my curiosity got the best of me. My fingers slid under the seal, tearing the paper cleanly. Inside, a single sheet of white paper, 2 words typed in the center: "It's time." My stomach twisted. A joke? A mistake? My mind scrambled for an explanation, but none made sense. The air in my apartment felt heavier. The silence suddenly stretched too long. I turned the paper over. Nothing. I held it up to the light. No hidden watermark. No indentation from a previous message. Just those 2 words staring back at me. A knock at the door made me jump. I spun around, my pulse spiking. I was not expecting anyone. A second knock, this time firmer. My legs carried me forward before I could think. Through the peephole, no one. My fingers hovered over the lock, hesitation curling in my chest. Something felt off. The hallway outside was too quiet, too still. I cracked the door open an inch. Nothing. No package. No lingering footsteps. Just empty air. A distant car horn blared from the street below, snapping me back to reality. I locked the door, my hands trembling. The paper still sat on my kitchen table. I did not want to touch it again. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend, Marcus. "Dude, did you get one too?" My breath caught. "One too?" I typed back, my fingers stiff. "What do you mean?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. The screen stayed silent. My pulse throbbed in my ears. I called him. Straight to voicemail. A pit formed in my stomach. I grabbed my coat, stuffing the letter into my pocket before heading out. The streets of Manhattan were their usual chaotic mess. Honking cabs, shuffling pedestrians, the hum of city life swallowing my thoughts. But I felt watched. Every reflective surface seemed to hold something just out of view. A shape in a store window that disappeared when I turned. A blurred figure in a passing cab's tinted glass. Paranoia? Maybe. But my gut told me otherwise. I reached Marcus's apartment in record time, knocking hard. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. I pressed my ear to the door. Silence. Then a sound. A slow, deliberate creak. The sound of a door moving from inside. My breath caught. I knocked again, louder this time. "Marcus?" No response. My fingers itched toward the doorknob. Locked. I pulled out my phone, dialing him again. Straight to voicemail. The feeling of being watched returned, pressing into my spine. I turned, scanning the dimly lit hallway. It was empty. And yet, I swore. I felt breathing. I left, my heart pounding. Back home, I locked every deadbolt, double-checking the windows. My phone buzzed again, unknown number. My throat went dry. I let it ring. The voicemail icon popped up. My hands trembled as I hit play. Static hissed through the speaker. Then, breathing, slow, measured, close. Then, a voice, not Marcus, not mine. Something else. It's time. I dropped the phone. A knock at my door. Sharp. 3 times. My body went cold. My breath came in short gasps. I turned toward the peephole. My stomach flipped. The hallway was empty. My door locked. But the knocking continued. 3 slow, deliberate raps. The same way it had started at Marcus's. My phone buzzed on the floor. A new message. Do not open the door. My pulse slammed against my ribs. My feet refused to move. The knocking stopped. The silence stretched. Then the doorknob turned. The doorknob twisted slowly, deliberately. My breath hitched. The deadbolt held, but I could hear the faint, almost thoughtful pressure against the wood. Whoever, whatever, was outside was not knocking anymore. It was testing. My phone buzzed again on the floor, the screen illuminating the darkened room. Another message. Do not look through the peephole. My body locked up. My pulse pounded against my ribs. I should have listened, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. I took a slow step forward, barely breathing, pressing my eye against the tiny glass lens. My vision swam. The hallway outside was wrong, too long. It stretched unnaturally, impossibly far, like a tunnel that did not exist a moment ago. The walls seemed to breathe. The flickering light at the end pulsed too slowly, like the rhythm of a dying heartbeat. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting. No sign of a person, and yet the knob was still turning. A whisper slithered through the wood. It's time. My hands jerked away from the door. The whisper did not sound like a voice. It was closer, more like inside my head. My pulse hammered. My phone buzzed again. Another message. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. Marcus is gone. My legs nearly gave out. I read the text again. Marcus, gone. The last time I saw him, his apartment. My breathing hitched. I had left him there, alone. I grabbed my coat, fumbling with my key. Rational thought tried to break through the haze of fear. Someone was playing a sick joke. That was the only explanation. I had to believe that. The subway ride was a blur of flickering lights and blurred faces. The city outside felt different. People moved slower, like echoes of themselves. The air smelled off, metallic, like the inside of a burned-out TV. My stomach curled into knots, but I pressed forward. Marcus's building loomed ahead, its windows dark except for one, his. The curtains were open. A shadow stood inside, watching me. My chest clenched. I bolted up the stairs, nearly tripping as I reached his floor. The hallway was empty. the silence too thick. I pounded on his door. No answer. My gut twisted. I tried the handle. It turned. Inside, the apartment was cold. Wrong. The lights flickered weakly, barely illuminating the space. The TV was on, static crackling across the screen. My throat tightened. The place was too clean, too empty. No dishes in the sink, no clothes on the floor, no sign that Marcus had ever lived here. My phone buzzed. My hands trembled as I read the message. Check the bedroom. I swallowed hard, each step toward the hallway heavier than the last. The door was ajar. Darkness waited inside. I reached for the switch. Nothing. The light was dead. My breath came in short bursts. The sheets on the bed were neatly tucked in, untouched. And then I saw it on the nightstand. A single envelope. My name was printed across the front. My stomach dropped. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The paper felt cold. The seal slid open too easily, as if it had been waiting for me. Inside, 2 words. It's time. A sound clicked behind me. My entire body froze. The bedroom door closing. Slowly, silently. I turned, pulse hammering. The darkness inside the room seemed to thicken, swallowing the light from the hallway. And then I saw it, the silhouette, standing in the doorway, watching. My throat clenched. My mind screamed to run, but my body refused to move. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I barely managed to lift it. A new message. Do not speak to it. Cold horror wrapped around my spine. My voice locked in my throat. The figure took a step forward. Then another. The lights flickered violently, the TV static growing louder. My vision swam. The room shifted, like the walls were folding inward. The figure stopped inches from me. The air turned frigid. It raised a hand, palm up, waiting. My fingers curled around the letter. My phone buzzed again. I did not want to look, but I did. Give it the letter. My breath came in short, uneven gasps. The figure remained still, waiting. My hands shook as I extended the paper forward. The fingers that took it were ice cold. The moment they closed around the letter, the air shifted. The static stopped. The lights returned to normal. The figure was gone. My knees buckled. My breath came in ragged gulps. The apartment was silent. My phone buzzed one last time. Leave. Now. I did not hesitate. I ran without looking back. But as I reached the front door, I heard it. A voice, not in my head this time, in the room behind me, soft, amused. See you soon. I did not stop running until I was back inside my apartment. Every lock bolted, every light turned on. My breath came in ragged bursts, my hands still trembling from the cold touch of whatever had taken that letter. It had felt real, too real. But the worst part was the message on my phone, the final warning. See you soon. The words refused to leave my head. I had barely caught my breath when something new made my stomach drop. Sitting on my kitchen table, right where the first letter had been, was another envelope, identical. Same crisp white paper, same clean block letters. My name. It was waiting for me. My chest tightened. I had not left this here. I had locked the door. My hand shook as I reached for it, the memory of Marcus's disappearance burning in my mind. The seal broke with an effortless tear. A single sheet of paper, a single sentence. Stop running. A chill ran down my spine. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I flinched, pulling it out with shaky hands. Unknown number. My heart pounded. I let it ring. The voicemail icon popped up. My fingers trembled as I pressed play. Silence. Then breathing. Close. Too close. A voice followed, distorted and layered, as if spoken through a broken radio. You left something behind. My stomach twisted violently. My eyes darted to my pocket, where I had stuffed the first letter, but it was not there. My blood ran cold. My phone buzzed again. A text. Look outside. I did not want to. Every instinct screamed not to, but I had already crossed that line, already stepped too far into whatever this was. I moved to the window, forcing myself to peek between the blinds. The street below was empty. And then, movement. A figure, standing beneath the street lamp, staring up at me. The figure was not moving, not shifting, just watching. My throat dried up. My phone vibrated in my grip. Another text. Let me in. My pulse thundered. The streetlight flickered once, twice, and in that brief moment of darkness, the figure was gone. The air in my apartment shifted. Heavy, pressing, wrong. My breath caught. I was not alone. My eyes darted around the room. Everything looked the same, yet it wasn't. The shadows stretched differently. the corners darker than they should be. My phone vibrated against my palm. Another text. Behind you. I could not move. I could not breathe. The cold breath on my neck told me I did not need to turn around to know it was real. I ran, bursting through my own front door, bolting down the hallway, lungs burning. The elevator was too far. The stairwell, my only option. I took them two at a time, my footsteps pounding against the concrete. The door at the bottom was locked. No. My fingers fumbled with the handle, my breath ragged. My phone buzzed again. My stomach clenched as I looked. A new text. You cannot leave the door unlocked by itself. The handle turned. The weight in my chest made my vision blur. I pushed through. The alley outside was cold. The city streets too quiet. I was not safe, not even close. I sprinted toward the main road, my heart hammering against my ribs. Streetlights flickered as I passed. A taxi approached me from the distance. I waved frantically, desperate. It slowed. Relief flooded my chest. The driver's window rolled down. My breath stopped. The driver was staring at me, unblinking, expressionless. And then he smiled, too wide, too knowing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I did not need to look. I knew what it would say. The driver spoke. It's time. The taxi door swung open. My body refused to move. The street was empty. No people, no cars, no escape. The light inside the taxi flickered, and then the voice came again, layered, stretching into something inhuman. Get in. The taxi door remained open, its interior swallowed in darkness. The driver's twisted grin stretched too wide, too knowing. His unblinking eyes locked onto mine. My body refused to move, my mind screaming at me to run, to turn away, to disappear before it was too late. But my feet felt cemented to the pavement. The street around me was too still. No distant chatter, no honking cars, no hum of city life. Just silence so deep it pressed into my ears. My phone buzzed again, the vibration rattling against my fingers. A new text. Get in. My breath caught. The driver cocked his head, waiting, expectant. The taxi's overhead light flickered once, twice, then off. My stomach twisted. I turned on my heel, forcing my legs to move. The second I did, the taxi slammed shut. Tires screeched. The cab peeled away, disappearing down the street, only to reappear at the next intersection, waiting. The driver's head slowly turned toward me. My vision swam. I bolted in the opposite direction, lungs burning, pulse hammering against my ribs. Streetlights flickered as I passed. My phone vibrated again. I did not dare look. The alley was the only path that made sense, the only place that felt like an escape. I dashed between the buildings, my footsteps echoing against the damp concrete. My breath came in ragged bursts, the cold air cutting into my throat. The alley stretched too long, the exit ahead, looking farther with each step. Something shifted behind me. Not footsteps, something heavier, dragging. A slow, deliberate pull. My body screamed not to turn around. My phone buzzed. New message. My shaking hands lifted the screen. Do not look back. I clenched my jaw, fighting every instinct to disobey. But I felt it. The air turned thick, pressure settling between my shoulder blades, like something looming too close. I ran harder. The alley twisted, changing. The walls narrowed. The street ahead blurred, distant. My legs slowed. My body resisted forward motion, as if something was pulling me back. My phone buzzed again. Stop resisting. My vision blurred. My limbs grew heavier. A shape loomed at the alley's exit. A person? No, the taxi driver. He stood still, the alley's dim glow painting his face in unnatural shadows. His grin had not faded. His arms hung at his sides, unnaturally long. The alley was closing in. My options were vanishing. I skidded to a stop, my pulse thundering. My only choice was the door to my right, an old metal entrance, rusted and dented. I grabbed the handle, locked. No, no, no. The dragging behind me grew louder, closer. My phone vibrated violently. My hands trembled as I lifted it. One last text. Turn around. I could not move. The weight on my chest crushed the air from my lungs. The shadows twisted at the corner of my vision. The driver took one slow step forward, then another. My fingers curled into the door handle, nails digging into rusted metal. My body was not mine anymore. My head turned on its own. The alley behind me was gone. There was no pavement, no buildings, no street lights, only a black void, swirling, pulling. My stomach dropped. The shadows stretched toward me. Tendrils of something not human, A whisper curled around my ears, my own voice twisted in ways that made my skin crawl. It's time. My hands let go. My feet stepped forward. I could feel myself being erased, the world around me fading, distorting, stretching into something unrecognizable. The last thing I saw was the taxi's headlights flickering one final time. Then, nothing. I woke up gasping for air. The world around me felt wrong. My apartment, my bed, everything in its place, but something inside me knew this was not real. My head pounded, my limbs heavy as if I had been somewhere else. My phone sat on the nightstand, screen dark, no missed calls, no texts, but I remembered everything: the taxi, the alley, the nothingness. I forced myself out of bed, legs shaky, as I reached for the blinds. The city outside buzzed, as it always did. Cars honking, people moving, life continuing. But the weight in my chest refused to fade. I grabbed my phone and dialed Marcus, straight to voicemail. Again. How long had I been gone? I checked my call log. No record of any outgoing calls. No texts. No messages. My breathing hitched. The last thing I remembered was stepping into that alley. But had I? My hands trembled as I opened my laptop, pulling up the local news. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed my own name into the search bar. No results. Not a single mention. My social media accounts gone. My name on my building's resident list erased. Panic clawed up my throat. I checked my work email, my bank account, anything that could prove I existed. The login failed. User not found. My heart slammed against my ribs. I grabbed my jacket, rushing out the door. The city felt different. No one looked at me. Not one glance, not one passing acknowledgement. I bumped into a man on the street. He did not react. He did not see me. My pulse skyrocketed. I ran to the nearest coffee shop, heading straight for the counter. The barista was taking orders, chatting, moving like normal. I stepped forward, clearing my throat. Hey, can I get a black coffee? No reaction. My stomach dropped. Hello? Nothing. The man behind me ordered. The barista smiled, nodded, handed him his drink. I reached out, grabbed the napkin dispenser, knocked it over. It clattered against the counter. The sound, sharp, jarring. No one reacted. The weight in my chest turned to ice. My shaking hands grabbed my phone. I opened the camera. My reflection was not there. My stomach lurched. My throat tightened as the panic set in. I staggered backward, knocking into a chair. A sharp ringing filled my ears, drowning out every other sound. My phone screen flickered. Unknown caller. My breath caught. My thumb hovered over the answer button. I let it ring. The voicemail icon popped up. My fingers moved on their own, pressing play. Static hissed through the speaker. Then a voice. "You are almost ready." The words sent a spike of dread through my spine. I turned, bolting out of the cafe. The streets blurred, my heart pounded, my mind racing. What was happening? Where was Marcus? Where was I? I turned a corner and stopped. A police station. My last chance. My only hope. I ran inside, breathless, chest heaving. The officers went about their business. The waiting area full of people. I approached the front desk. The officer behind it barely glanced up. I need help," I gasped. "My friend, Marcus, he is missing. I think I am missing too." The officer's pen did not pause. Name? Relief flooded my chest. Someone could see me. Yes. My name is... My mouth opened, but the words never came out. My name. It was gone. My tongue felt heavy. My throat tightened. I could not say it. The officer looked up, expression neutral. "Sir?" My pulse hammered. I could not remember. My name, my own name. My stomach twisted into knots. The officer stared for another beat, then sighed, scribbling something down. He turned the paper toward me. My hands trembled as I read it. Missing person case, unidentified male. A chill wrapped around my spine. The officer stood. "You should sit down." His voice had shifted. Flat. Wrong. My breath caught. His eyes were locked on mine, unblinking. Something stirred behind them. My hands clenched into fists. My phone buzzed again. I knew what it would say. "Leave." My entire body screamed at me to run. The officer's smile was too wide, too knowing. I turned, pushing through the doors, gasping as the cold air hit my skin. The world around me was tilting, twisting, wrong. My phone vibrated. Another voicemail. I did not want to listen, but I did. The voice on the other end whispered, "You were never here." I stumbled out of the police station, the air around me feeling too thin, too unreal. My own name had vanished from my mind, my existence erased from records, and the only thing tethering me to reality was the phone buzzing in my shaking hands. My stomach churned as I replayed the voicemail. "You were never here." The words seeped into my bones, their weight suffocating. I wanted to scream, to force someone, anyone, to acknowledge me. But every passing face was empty. People moved around me like shadows, their features indistinct, blurred. The streets stretched on, twisting in a way that made no sense. I turned a corner, expecting the familiar route back to my apartment. Instead, I stood in front of the police station again. My breath hitched. My pulse pounded in my ears. I took another path, then another. Each time, I ended up at the same place. The doors loomed in front of me, open just an inch, waiting. My phone buzzed again. A text. "Stop running." My throat tightened. The streetlights above flickered, casting long, unnatural shadows. The doors creaked open on their own. The police station wanted me to come back. My feet refused to move forward. Instead, I turned and ran. The city blurred around me, the streets warping into unfamiliar shapes. Buildings shifted, alleys stretched. I ran until my lungs burned, but every road led back to the same place, the police station. My pulse hammered. This was a trap. This was not real. My phone vibrated. Another message. "Nowhere is safe." A sharp knock echoed behind me. My body locked up. I turned slowly. The same taxi from before. The door open, waiting. The driver sat motionless, his face unreadable. A voice drifted from the cab's interior, hollow, layered. "You are almost ready." My stomach twisted. Ready for what? The cab's headlights flickered once, twice. My body tensed. I stepped backward. The moment I did, the driver's smile widened. Too wide. My phone buzzed again. A new voicemail. My fingers trembled as I hit play. A whisper slithered through the speaker. "Let it take you." My entire body locked up. The street around me dimmed. The lights pulsed, slower, like the city was breathing, waiting. I had no control. My feet moved toward the cab. The cold air turned suffocating. The closer I got, the heavier the world around me became. My fingers brushed the door handle. The city outside the cab's windows was gone. Only darkness. My heart slammed against my ribs. My reflection in the cab window, it did not move like me. It was smiling. My breath hitched. The weight around me tightened. I pulled my hand back, snapping out of the trance. The street jerked into motion, as if reality had just been rewound. The city returned. The cab was gone. But I knew it was not over. My phone buzzed. A new message. I hesitated before looking. One last letter. My stomach twisted. The street around me was empty. No people, no cars, just the wind howling through the buildings. I turned toward my apartment, but I already knew what I would find. The letter would be waiting. It had always been waiting. My hands trembled as I pushed open my door. The apartment was dim, silent. The letter sat on the kitchen table, pristine. My chest tightened. The world around me felt thinner, like I was standing on the edge of something vast, something watching me. I picked up the envelope, the paper colder than before. My fingers tore through the seal, a single sheet, a single line. It's time. My vision blurred. My pulse roared in my ears. The air turned thick, pressing. My phone vibrated. Unknown caller. My fingers hovered over the screen. The letter felt heavier in my grip. The air around me shifted. A whisper crawled through the room, its source nowhere, or maybe everywhere. My phone rang again, louder, insistent, final. The walls of my apartment stretched, darkening, twisting into something unrecognizable. The choice was no longer mine. I answered the call. The phone felt ice cold against my ear. The call connected, but no sound came through, not at first, just silence. Deep, endless silence, stretching out like something waiting. My breath came in short, uneven gasps. I could feel it, something on the line, listening. My mouth opened, but before I could speak, the whisper came. Now you understand. My stomach twisted. The voice was layered, not one voice, but many. My fingers tightened around the phone. Who are you? The line crackled. The whisper came again, closer, more distorted. You were never supposed to know. The walls of my apartment seemed to shrink. The air turned thick, pressing against my skin. I swallowed hard. What do you want? The whisper grew stronger. It's time. My chest clenched. Time for what? The lights flickered. The floor beneath me felt unsteady. My reflection in the window, it moved, but I had not. My pulse slammed into my throat. The voice dropped to a breath, curling against my ear. Time to leave. A sharp knock at the door sent my heart into a free fall. 3 deliberate raps, the same rhythm as before. My body refused to turn toward it. The phone in my hand grew warm. A new message appeared on the screen. Do not open it. My fingers trembled. The knocking continued. I forced myself to step backward. The moment I did, the whisper laughed. Not human. Not right. There is nowhere left to run. My throat dried. My back pressed against the wall. My reflection in the window watched me. It was smiling. My stomach twisted violently. That was not my face anymore. My phone buzzed again. A new text. Look up. My breath caught. I did not want to obey, but I did. The ceiling was wrong. Dark, endless, stretching into something vast, something waiting to pull me in. My mind screamed. The knocking stopped, but something else, something heavier, moved outside the door. The pressure in the apartment thickened. The walls breathed. My limbs felt sluggish, as if I was sinking. My phone vibrated one last time. I forced my shaking hands to check the screen, open the door. My stomach churned. A choice. I could ignore it. I could wait. But deep down, I knew if I did not open that door, it would open for me. My feet moved on their own. The knob was ice cold under my fingers. I turned it. The door creaked open an inch. The hallway outside was pitch black, not empty, consuming. The whisper returned, curling around my mind. Now you understand. My pulse stopped. The darkness behind the door moved. A shape shifting, reaching. The world around me tilted. The last thing I saw was my reflection in the window, still watching, still smiling. Then everything went black. The darkness swallowed me whole. It was not just the absence of light. It was something deeper, something alive. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. I reached out, but there was nothing. No walls, no floor, no air. Just emptiness. My body felt weightless, floating through something vast and unseen. My mind screamed for logic, for sense, but none existed here. Then a sound, a single slow inhale, deep and deliberate. I was not alone. My heart slammed against my ribs. Where am I? My own voice felt distant, swallowed by the blackness. The answer came, a whisper curling into my skull. You never left. My stomach dropped. I wanted to argue, to scream, but the words would not come. The darkness shifted. It moved like liquid, stretching, breathing. My chest tightened. I tried to turn, but there was no direction. I was nowhere. And yet, I felt something watching. The void trembled. A shape began forming. No, unraveling. A figure peeled itself from the darkness, emerging without sound. My pulse pounded in my ears. It was me. No, not me. It had my face, my shape, but the smile stretched too wide. The eyes were too deep, too hollow. I tried to move, but my body refused. The figure stepped closer, weightless. My reflection, but not mine. It spoke in my voice, but layered, fragmented. You were never supposed to see. My fingers twitched, my lungs burning from the thick, choking silence. See what? The thing tilted its head, considering that you do not exist. A chill sank into my bones. The air around me crackled, warping like a dying frequency. The darkness pulled. I fought against it, but my body, it was not solid anymore. The shape of me unraveled. My breath stilled. I was disappearing. My phone vibrated in my pocket. My fingers, shaking, barely grasped it. A message. The screen flickered violently. The text read, "Answer it." My throat tightened. My body was collapsing into the void, fading like smoke. The figure, my other self, smiled wider. My phone buzzed again. Unknown caller. My vision blurred. The void was swallowing me, erasing me. I pressed accept. The whisper that answered was not human. You understand now. The weight in my chest crushed down. My lips parted, the question falling out. Who are you? The answer came, sharp and absolute. You. The void collapsed. Light erupted. My body slammed against something solid. My lungs seized, air burning back into me. I gasped. I was in my apartment. My head spun, my limbs heavy. The kitchen light buzzed overhead. The table was empty. No letter, no phone. My hands shook as I grabbed my pocket. Empty. My heart raced. I staggered forward, staring at my reflection in the window, my own face. Normal. No smile. No hollow eyes. A wave of nausea hit me. Had I imagined it? Had I? A knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps. My blood ran cold. I turned toward the door, my breath caught in my throat. My fingers curled into my palms. The peephole called to me. I refused. My phone buzzed from the counter. The screen glowed. Unknown caller. My pulse stopped. My chest heaved. The knocking came again, louder, more insistent. My mind screamed, "Do not answer. Do not look. Do not move." But then, the final message appeared on the screen. My fingers froze. It's time. If this story unsettled you, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Because sometimes, when the phone rings in the middle of the night, it is not a wrong number. Have you ever received a call you could not explain? Let me know in the comments below. And if you ever get a letter with 2 words, do not read it. Because if you do, you might not just disappear. You might never have existed at all.